التذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله والسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة إلى الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته قربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله أكبر ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العظيم. عدد كل حرف كتب أكتب أبد الآبدين وداهر الداهرين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. وحسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من أن أضل أو ضل أو زن أو زن أو ظلم أو ظلم أو أجهل أو يجهل علي. اللهم أغننا بالعلم وزينا بالحلم وأكرمنا بالتقوى وجملنا بالعافية يا أرحم الراحمين. Right, so can you guys all hear me okay? Okay. So we're picking up where we left off in the section of Hajj, where the author says the arkan of Hajj are 5. Arkan in Arabic means integrals. So he's saying the integrals of Hajj are 5. So if you guys remember when we talked about Salah, for example, we spoke about how Salah has integrals. There's specific actions. If you do not perform them while you pray, your prayer is completely invalid. So one of them, for example, being reading the Fatiha, or for example, making sajda, or for example, making ruku'. If someone were to try to pray leaving out one of these things, their prayer is completely invalid. Okay? Their prayer is completely invalid. And that's what we mean by integral, or rukn in Arabic. Some people also use the terminology of fard, as meaning like it's something you have to do for that specific part of worship. But really, it's an integral. You have to do it, or else that worship is not valid. Okay? So there are things that in worships, in certain types of worship that you have to do, and there are certain things that if you leave them, that form of worship is still valid, right? So for example, going back to the example of Salah, if someone was to neglect to say Allahu Akbar when they transition from motion to motion, their Salah is still valid, right? That's a sunnah. But if they were to leave a sajda or ruku', their Salah is invalid. What we're going to talk about today are the integrals of Hajj and the integrals of Umrah. The integrals of Hajj and the integrals of Umrah. The specific actions, if you were to neglect them in Hajj or Umrah, it would be completely invalid. It wouldn't count for you. Okay? And then next class, we'll flesh it out and talk about some of the sunnahs of Hajj and Umrah. So in Hajj and Umrah, we have what are called arkan. They also call them furud in Arabic, or things that are obligatory. So there's some technical terminology we have to use here to make things easy to understand. So in the Shafi'i school, in every single chapter of fiqh that we discuss, except for Hajj, the word fard in Arabic and the word wajib mean the same thing. Okay, so if you hear me say, for example, when we're talking about wudu or salah or fasting or zakat, if you hear someone say, for example, that action is fard or that action is wajib, it means the same thing. It's obligatory. If you were to neglect it, you're sinful, and your ibadah is actually not even valid. Thank you. Okay? But in Hajj, there's a difference between what we call fard and there's a difference between what we call wajib. All right? So when we say fard and Hajj, it's an integral. Meaning if you were to neglect it, you are sinful and your Hajj or your Umrah is invalid. But then we also have things that we call that are wajib in Hajj and Umrah. Okay? These things that are wajib in Hajj and Umrah, they're obligatory to perform. If you neglect to do so, okay, your Hajj or your Umrah is still valid. But you have to pay, you have to expiate either by slaughtering something or paying a certain amount of money or something like that. Okay? So in Hajj and Umrah, we have what's called fard and wajib. The fard is the integrals. If you neglect them, it's not valid. Your Hajj or Umrah is completely not valid. And what's called wajib is something you have to do, but if you neglect to do it, your Hajj and your Umrah is still valid. You just have to pay some sort of wealth, whether it's slaughtering an animal or paying something of money or food. Okay? All right? So this difference in terminology only exists in this section, the section of Hajj. It doesn't exist in any other section of fiqh. In any other section of fiqh, the words are interchangeable. They mean the same thing. They're synonyms. Okay? So he says here, the arkan of Hajj are five, meaning the integrals of Hajj are five. These five things, you have to do it to have a valid Hajj. He says, what does he say? All right. He says, all right, ihram. This is the intention to perform the Hajj or the Umrah. Okay. Did we read the sentence where he says the acts of the Hajj are of three types, the integral elements, the duties, and the sunan? Did we read that? Do you guys remember? We'll read it now, okay? So he says on page 32, the acts of the Hajj are of three types, integral elements called arkan or called furud, the duties, which he translated as duties, but in Arabic it's called wajib or wajibat, and the sunan, things that are sunnah. And we explain the difference between arkan or integral elements and duties, right? One of them, if you neglect it, the worship is completely invalid. The other one, if you neglect it, it's valid, but you have to expiate with some sort of payment. Okay? That's the difference between what he calls integral elements and duties. And then sunnahs are things that if you were to neglect to do so, you just miss out on reward. Okay, if you were to do them, you get rewarded. Okay? So those are the three categories of actions in Hajj. Today we're looking at just the integral elements. So he says the arkan of Hajj are five. Ihram. This is the intention to perform the Hajj or the Umrah. It is preferred that one utters the words, I intend to perform the Hajj or the Umrah, and I sanctify myself thereby for God the Exalted. It is not valid to do Ihram for Hajj except in the Hajj months, which are Shawwal, Dhul Qa'dah, the 10 days of the Hijjah, the last of which is the dawn on the day of sacrifice, 10th of the Hijjah. So we have five different integrals for Hajj. The first one is called the Ihram, which is an intention to enter Hajj. An intention to enter Hajj. Okay? This ihram, just like how, for example, we discussed during Salah, right? Someone says, I intend to pray Dhuhr, the obligatory prayer of Dhuhr for the sake of Allah Ta'ala in congregation. Allahu Akbar, right? They enter into Salah through an intention. Or they enter into wudu with an intention, right? Or they intend to fast the next day. If you notice, there's a pattern here, right? We, as a Shafi'is, we're taught that you have to always intend something in order for it to count as worship. Okay? Now, the intention for Hajj is very specific and has a lot of conditions in detail. The first of which, it has a special name. It's called Ihram. All right? It's called Ihram. Ihram is only valid for Hajj during the Hajj months, which is the month of Shawwal, the 10th month of the Hijri calendar, the month right after Ramadan. The month of Dhul Qa'dah, the 11th month of the Hijri calendar, the month that just finished. It's between Shawwal and the month we're in right now. And the last month that it's valid in are the first 10 days of the Hijjah, the days that we're in right now. So outside of these 2 months and 10 days, one cannot make ihram for Hajj. Okay? So during these 2 months and 10 days, if someone utters, okay, if someone makes the intention for ihram in their heart, again, remember, intention in our school, it's enough just to make it in your heart, right? Articulating it is sunnah. So if someone makes an intention in their heart for ihram, for Hajj, during these 2 months and 10 days, or they articulate it, khalas, they become someone who has to perform Hajj. They've entered into ihram. They have to perform Hajj. Okay? So if someone's just sitting in a room one day, and they're just like, khalas, I intend to, what does he say in English? He says, I intend to perform the Hajj and I sanctify myself thereby for God the Exalted. And they just say it. Or they intend it in their heart. You have to make Hajj now. All right. As long as you did this during the 2 months and 10 days we just talked about, Shawwal, Dhul Qa'dah, and Dhul Hijjah, you have to make Hajj. And you've entered a state of ihram, okay, or it's haram for you to perform certain things that we're going to talk about later on. You have to make Hajj. Like, someone might ask, okay, what happens if you make the intention for ihram of Hajj outside of those 2 months and 10 days? Someone, for example, in Ramadan just says, I intend to make Hajj and I sanctify myself for Allah the Most Exalted. What happens? It's outside the 2 months and 10 days we spoke about, right? So it doesn't count as an ihram or an intention for Hajj. Rather, it immediately turns into an intention or ihram for Umrah. So if I'm in Ramadan, or Rajab or Rabi al-Awwal, or any time of the year outside of Shawwal, Dhul Qa'dah, and the first 10 of the Hijjah, and I make an intention for Hajj, and I say, I intend to perform Hajj, and I sanctify myself for the sake of Allah Ta'ala, what happens is I become what's called a muhrim. I'm in a state of ihram now, okay? But what do I have to perform? Umrah, not Hajj, okay? I have to go perform Umrah. I got to buy a ticket, get a visa, go to Mecca, perform Umrah in order to fulfill this intention, okay? So he says, ihram, this is the intention to perform the Hajj or the Umrah. It is preferred that one utters the words. So uttering is sunnah, but saying it in your heart is enough. What do you say? In English, you would say, I intend to perform the Hajj or the Umrah, depending on which one you want, and I sanctify myself thereby for God the Exalted. In Arabic, you would say, Nawaitu al-Hajj wa al-Umrah, wa ahramtu bihi lillahi ta'ala. Okay? They have the same meaning. You can choose either one you want. Okay? So, ihram is the intention for entering Hajj. It's also the entrance of a state. Because remember, we said, once you enter a state of ihram, there are certain things you can and cannot do. Just like how, for example, if you enter into salah, okay, certain things that were previously permissible for you become haram now, right? You can't eat in salah, you can't drink in salah, you can't, make too many movements while you're in salah, right? Similarly, ihram, the intention for Hajj or Umrah, once you make it and you enter into it, a lot of things that were previously permissible for you become haram. Amongst them are you can't wear certain types of clothing, okay? Depending on if you're a man or a woman, all right? You cannot have intimacy with your spouse. You cannot, like shave or trim your fingernails or things like that. It's going to come into detail. But the point is, right? The point is that it's an intention and it makes you enter a specific state, okay? A state of ihram. Now, what that means is that you should be careful how you do your ihram, right? If someone wants to make Hajj, okay, and they decide to make their ihram in Shawwal, that's 2.5 months you have to stay, or 2 months and 10 days you have to remain in that state, not having intimacy with your spouse, not shaving, not trimming your fingernails. You can't wear certain clothes. You can't use scents or perfumes or things like that. It's quite difficult, okay? It's quite difficult to maintain for a very long period of time. And we're going to talk about the sunnah way of doing ihram, inshallah ta'ala, in the future, towards the end of this chapter. So he says, ihram, this is the intention to perform the Hajj or the Umrah. It is preferred that one utters the words, I intend to perform the Hajj or the Umrah, and I sanctify myself thereby for God the Exalted. It is not valid to enter ihram for Hajj except in the Hajj months, which are Shawwal, Dhul Qa'dah, and the 10 days of Dhul Hijjah. We spoke about that, right? Those are the only days you can make an intention for Hajj, for Umrah, for an ihram for Hajj. If you do it outside of those 2 months and 10 days, it flips and it becomes an intention for what? Umrah automatically. Okay? He says the last day is the dawn on the day of sacrifice, the dawn of Eid. Yani. The dawn of Eid, khalas. You can't make ihram for Hajj anymore. All right? طيب, he says then, the remaining arkan or the remaining integrals after ihram are what? He says they're the standing at Arafah, the tawaf of ifada, the sa'i, and the shaving or cutting of the hair. طيب, so the first integral is ihram, right? And that's with that integral you enter into Hajj. So that one you have to perform first. It's just conceptually impossible to imagine someone performing Hajj without doing ihram. It's like someone trying to perform salah without starting with an intention and saying Allahu Akbar. You just walk into salah. You can't do that, right? So ihram has to be first. Ihram has to be first. The remaining 4 arkan are the standing at Arafah. So the standing Arafah is what? It's an integral. And what is it? It's where the people who are making Hajj, the Hajjaj, they have to be present at a valley called Arafah. Okay? At a specific time, which is the day of Arafah. So there's a day called Arafah, the day of Arafah, and there's a valley called Arafah as well. Okay? So they have to be present. The person who's making Hajj has to be present in that valley, okay, on the day of Arafah, anytime after time of Dhuhr, after Zawad. After Dhuhr enters, as long as they're there in that valley, even just for a second, they just enter and they exit, they fulfill that condition. So it's physically being present in that valley at that specific time. Okay. And it's the most important integral of Hajj. Why is it the most important integral? Because it's connected to a specific time, right? If you miss that window of opportunity, you have one day to make sure you get into that valley as someone making Hajj. If you miss that window of opportunity, your Hajj is done. You've missed it. Okay? You've missed it. You got to make it up next year. All right? The Prophet said in a hadith, he said, Al-Hajju Arafah. Yani, Hajj is Arafah, meaning the most important integral is Arafah. If you make it on that day in that valley, you're good. The rest of it is easy. Okay? So the next integral is what? The standing at Arafah, making sure yourself as a pilgrim, okay, you are at Arafah, okay, you are at Arafah in that valley anytime between noon or we'll say dhuhr, okay, to what? To Maghrib. You have to be there, okay? You have to be there. If you miss it, khalas, you're done. Even if all you do is just pass through, just enter in your exit accounts, all right? Just make sure you're there, all right? The longer you're there, the better. Because it's sunnah to make a lot of dua there, spend a lot of time there. It's a really special and noble day, a day where Allah Ta'ala, He accepts the du'as of the pilgrims and the ummah, a day where, people who even aren't making hajj are encouraged to fast. So it's a special day, and it's a day that, we'll commemorate here at Al-Rahma, inshallah Ta'ala. But it's vitally important for someone who's making hajj to make sure they catch that day in that valley. So first you make ihram and you make sure you catch the standing Arafah. طيب. The third integral is the tawaf. He calls it tawaf of ifada. Tawaf, as you all know, is when you orbit or you walk around the Kaaba 7 times. So if this is the Kaaba, imagine this water bottle is the Kaaba. You just go around it, you walk around it 7 times. Okay? You walk around it 7 times. That's called tawaf. Okay? That is called tawaf. طيب. Tawaf, he calls it tawaf of ifada. So there's different kinds of tawaf. Anyone who enters the masjid of the Kaaba can make tawaf, even if they're not making hajj or umrah. Someone just walks in, they want to make tawaf, that's fine, that's beautiful, that's a form of worship, right? Tawaf al-ifada is what? It's the integral tawaf. It's just the Arabic way of saying it's the integral tawaf that a person making hajj has to perform. And it must be performed after what? After being in Arafah. So someone who's making hajj, they make their ihram, they make sure they're Arafah. After they finish Arafah, okay, they make their way back to the Kaaba and they do tawaf 7 times. Okay, they do tawaf 7 times. طيب. The next integral, he says, is what's called the sa'i, which is the movement 7 laps between the 2 hills, Safa and Marwa. Okay, between the 2 hills of Safa and Marwa. These laps, okay, these laps must be done after a tawaf. So typically they're going to be done at this time. All right. So you do your ihram, then you go to Arafah, then you do tawaf, then you can do your sa'i. Okay. Then you can do your sa'i, your 7 laps between Safa and Marwa. We'll go into more detail with these things in the next sections, inshallah. The last thing he says, the last integral is the shaving or cutting of the hair. Okay. The last integral someone performs to end their hajj or umrah is to shave or cut their hair. For a man, it's preferred to shave their hair. For a woman, it's preferred to cut their hair, just trim a little bit off the edges. Okay, and that's enough. All right. So the shaving or cutting of the hair is the last integral. If someone has no hair, just run a razor over your head. It's fine. That counts. All right. So if you're a man, it's preferred to cut your hair, or shave your hair. And if you're a woman, it's preferred to just, take some off the edges, cut a little bit off. Okay. And then with that, that's a complete hajj. That is all you need to do to perform hajj. Okay. To perform umrah, the next section, like he says, the integral elements of the umrah, they are the same as the arkan or the integrals of hajj, with the exception of standing arafah, which is not one of them. So umrah is the same exact thing as hajj, with the exception of there's no arafah. There's no arafah. Okay. So umrah has an ihram. Okay. Umrah has an ihram. What's the window of opportunity for ihram of umrah? Anytime you want. You can go make umrah anytime during the year. Even if you want to go make umrah while people are making hajj during the hajj season, you can do that. It's no problem. Okay, so Umrah is not restricted to a specific time. Whereas we said Hajj's ihram has to be in Shawwal, Dhul Qa'dah, or Dhul Hijjah. Okay, and specifically, the standing of Arafah is specific to Hajj, and it must be on the day of Arafah. Okay, for Umrah, you just make ihram anytime you want. What do you say? You say in Arabic, "Nawaytu al-Umrah wa ahramtu biha lillahi ta'ala." Or you say in English, "I intend to perform Umrah and I sanctify myself thereby for God the Exalted." And you're done. You're in a state of ihram. You're ready to make Umrah. What do? You go to Mecca. All you do is tawaf. You do 7 times. You orbit the Kaaba 7 times. You do sa'i, 7 laps between Safa and Marwa. You shave your hair, you cut it, and you're done. Okay? The whole thing might take less than an hour, depending on how fast you go and how busy it is. You can do multiple in one day, as many as you want. Okay? So Umrah is much faster than Hajj. Hajj takes a few days. You have to make sure you're at Arafah, then you have to go and do this and that. So it might take at least, a couple of days, right? But here, Umrah is much faster. Much faster. Okay? Did you have a question?
Yeah, so you said like if somebody went to Hajj in the show, they'll have to wait 2 months for the day of Arafah.
That's correct. So he said, so if someone decides to make ihram for Hajj in Shawwal, the 10th month, do they have to wait 2 months and 10 days for Arafah? Yeah, that's right. They have to wait. And you're waiting in the state of ihram, and there's certain things you can't do. And it's hard. It's hard, right? Classically, in the Muslim world, what we studied in Yemen, as soon as people celebrated Eid and they fasted 6 days of Shawwal, they start walking to Hajj. Where we studied in southern Yemen, the people start. This is back in the day. Nowadays, there's cars and buses, but back in the day, as soon as they finished on the 7th day after Eid, when they finished fasting the 6 days, they bid their families farewell and they're off to Hajj on camels, walking, whatever. They'd make it to Hajj just in time to perform their pilgrimage in Dhul Hijjah, right? And then be back afterwards, right? Around like New Year's time, around Muharram. Yeah. So, تفضل.
So, for people on the Hajj, what do they do before the day of Arafah?
So what do they do before the day of Arafah? So let's say someone makes Hajj, okay? And they enter Mecca. So it depends on when you enter Mecca, right? So you guys will see that one of the obligatory actions is that you shouldn't pass a specific point without making ihram if you intend to enter Mecca for Hajj or Umrah. So what you would do is you would enter as an state of ihram and you would just make Umrah a few times if you would like, right? You can just worship Allah Ta'ala, okay? And usually the way they plan it is like they don't enter it so far in advance where they're sitting there, in Mecca for a long period of time in a state of ihram. There's like logistics involved, trip planning and stuff like that. But you can just worship Allah Ta'ala until it's time for Arafah. Yeah. Okay. Tafadhal.
So we talked about when you make the intention, you have to now commit to Hajj.
Mm-hmm.
When do you have to do that by? Is there a certain time frame?
What do you mean when you have to do that by?
So you said that a person makes the intention to get into the state of Ihram for Hajj. Let's
Mhm.
say, within those 2 months and 10 days, they're now like they have to go and they have to do it. Is there a specific time frame? Is it like by the next Hajj season or?
So if someone makes an intention for Hajj, let's say someone did it in Shawwal, right? They have to perform Hajj that year. Yeah. Okay. So this question was, what happens if you do make an intention for Hajj or make ihram for Hajj? Do you have to make it in that year or can you make it in the future? No, you have to make it for that year. Okay, for that year. If you do it for Umrah, right? Someone makes an ihram for Umrah, you have to do it as soon as possible. Because remember, you're in a state of ihram. You can't get out of a state of ihram until you complete your Hajj or Umrah. Okay? So to make sure you leave that state, just go do it as soon as possible. All right, especially for Umrah, do it as soon as possible. For Hajj, obviously you have to wait until it's Arafah, but you can't delay it beyond that year. Okay, you can't delay your Hajj beyond that year. Okay. Right. So he said we covered the arkan of Hajj and the arkan of Umrah, the elements or the integral elements of Hajj and Umrah. Okay. Now we're going to go into some detail regarding tawaf. Okay, تفضل. No, that's not an intention. No, that's yeah. So the sister asked, what happens if you're just chatting with someone and you make, you just say, oh, I want to make hajj, or I wish I can make hajj, or something like that. That doesn't count as an intention for haram. Like I just said a few times myself on here, right? And that doesn't count. So if you're like, telling a story or teaching someone, or you just, expressing your desire to do something, that doesn't count as an intention to make it haram for hajj or umrah. You have to articulate it the way you guys saw in the book, right? You say, I intend to do it and I sanctify myself for the sake of God. Okay? So that's how you enter it. Okay, just like how, for example, if you say, I want to pray dhuhr, that doesn't count as an intention for dhuhr, right? You have to actually get up and face the qibla and say, I intend to pray the obligatory prayer of dhuhr, and so on and so forth. Tafadhali. Go ahead. Yeah. So if she asked, what happens if you get into a state of ihram, right, and something comes up and you can't perform the hajj? Okay, there's a way out of it. Yeah, there's a way out of it. If that ever happens to you, then speak to someone, speak to us, or speak to Sheikh Abdul Karim, for example, and they'll tell you what to do. It's kind of beyond the scope of the book, so we're not going to go into it. But yeah, there's a way out of it. Don't worry. There are specific um, sunnahs associated with shaving and cutting of the hair. You dispose of the hair, it's best to dispose it by burying it. Okay, it's sunnah to bury your hair after you cut it. Okay. I don't know if you get the opportunity in Hajj or Umrah with how busy it is and how the logistics there work. I've never been. Maybe someone who's been there can enlighten us. But it's generally sunnah to bury your hair. It's generally sunnah to bury your hair when you cut it. As for the specific du'as that you can say when you cut your hair, so it's sunnah to face the qibla while you're getting your hair shaved or cut. It's sunnah to start with the right side. Okay. It's sunnah to shave your entire head if you're a man. Okay. It's sunnah to shave your entire head if you're a man, but the minimum is to shave just 3 hairs. So even just like one stroke of the razor is enough. Okay. Similarly, for a woman, it's sunnah. Okay. You can just cut 3 hairs, like the tips of 3 hairs, and you're good. Okay. You don't have to cut your entire like get all your hair short. Okay. And then and you would say, so there are du'as you can say. There's 2 du'as you can say that are sunnah to say while you get your head shaved or cut. You would say, Allahumma هذه ناصيتي بيدك فاجعلني بكل شعرة نورا إلى يوم القيامة واغفر لي ذنوبي. That's the first dua you can say. It says, oh God, this is my forehead in your hands. It's an expression in Arabic. ناصيتي بيدك, right? It's like saying, you're in control of me. So make for me, for every hair, light on the day of judgment, and forgive me for my sins. And the next dua you can say, Allahumma atini bi'adadi kulli sha'ratin hasana, wamhu anni biha sayyi'a. وارفع لي بها درجة واغفر لي وللمحلقين والمقصرين ولجميع المسلمين. Oh Allah, give me according to the number of every hair a good deed, and according to the number of each hair wipe away a sin, and raise my rank according to the number of each hair, and forgive me and all those who are shaving their heads and cutting their heads and all the believers. So those are two du'as you can say. Okay, Allahumma hadhihi nasiyati biyadek faj'alni bikulli sha'ratin nura ila yawm al-qiyamah waghfir li dhunubi. And then you could say as well, Allahumma atini bi'adadi kulli sha'ratin hasana wamhu anni biha sayyi'a warfa' li biha daraja waghfir li walil muhalliqin wal muqassirin wali jami' al-muslimin. طيب, so that is the shaving or the cutting. So now we're going to go into some detail about the tawaf and the sa'i. So tawaf, you mentioned, is orbiting the Kaaba or walking around it or circumambulating, as they say, 7 times. Okay, 7 times. Your tawaf, let's just read what he says first. He says, necessary for tawaf are the covering of the awrah, the state of tahara from things which invalidate it and from najasa, and that tawaf is 7 circles inside the mosque and keeping the house on one's left, and that one is not actually inside the Kaaba. There's a hadith the Prophet says, he says, at-tawafu, yani, the meaning of at-tawafu mithla salah, illa anna nutuq yahillu fihi. Yani, tawaf is like prayer, is like salah. So everything that's obligatory or condition for prayer is a condition or obligatory in tawaf, with one exception. You can speak during tawaf. For that reason, what does he say? Necessary for tawaf is the covering of the awrah. So whatever you would cover normally in salah, you have to cover as well while you make tawaf. Okay? This is for all types of tawaf, whether you're doing it for hajj, umrah, or you just, someone who's not making hajj or umrah, you want to just walk into the Ka'ba's masjid, right in the masjid, and just make tawaf. The first thing is make sure your awrah is covered. Then he says the state of tahara from things which invalidate it and from najasa. Okay, so remember in salah we said you have to be free of impurity, whether that means impurity on your clothes or the place where you're prostrating, and also being free of like ritual impurity. So you're not in a state where you have to make wudu or ghusl. You have your wudu and you don't have to make ghusl. So likewise in tawaf is the same thing. Okay, make sure you're in a state of wudu when you make tawaf, or else your tawaf is invalid. That also means, right, that a woman who's menstruating or a man who has to make ghusl cannot make tawaf. Okay, cannot make tawaf. All right. So the state of tahara from things which invalidate it and from najasa, and that the tawaf is 7 circles inside the mosque and keeping the house on one's left, and that one is not actually inside the Kaaba. The tawaf in and of itself is 7 laps. Okay, 7 laps. Those laps have to be inside the mosque, inside the masjid. Okay, but outside the Kaaba. Which means what? Which means that if you're on the street doing it, it doesn't count. You're not in the masjid. If you're inside the Kaaba for whatever reason, it doesn't count either. You have to be inside the masjid, but outside the Kaaba. Okay? 7 laps, the Kaaba stays on your left the whole time. Okay? The Kaaba must stay on your left the whole time. If it stays on, if you can't do the opposite. You see everyone going this way and you decide to go that way. It's faster. No, you can't. You got to go with the flow. Keep it on your left and walk. All right? All right, so the way it works is that there is a stone in the Kaaba called the black stone. Okay? There is a stone in the Kaaba, tamam, called the black stone. It's the famous stone that the Prophet ﷺ placed into the Kaaba when it was being rebuilt during time of Jahiliyyah before Islam came. It's a stone that they say came from heaven. It was white when it came down. It turned black from the sins of man. Okay? It's a stone. It's in a corner of the Kaaba. That's where your laps start. Okay? So each lap must start there and end there. Okay? So just imagine, we'll just, for the sake of the example, just to visualize things, this is, we'll say that this is the Kaaba. Okay? This is the Kaaba. This little bit right here, the barcode, we'll say is like the stone. Okay? Or the stone would be. Okay? So you got to start there and you got to make your way around, and that's 1. All right? Let's say you walk into the mosque, the masjid, and you end up here for whatever reason. and you're walking, you're walking, you're walking. None of this counts. All right. Is when you get to the stone, right? That's where you can start counting your laps. Okay. Your laps. So 1 lap, 2 lap, 3 lap, 4 lap, 7 laps is all you have to do. Okay. They start with the stone, they end with the stone. Make sure you have wudu the whole time. Make sure your awra is covered the whole time. Okay. Wudu could be a challenge. Okay, for several reasons, right? We mentioned in our school, in the Shafi'i school, touching a person of the opposite gender breaks your wudu, right? It's busy there, it's crowded. What are you gonna do? You know, you'd be making wudu every minute, right? For this reason, because the difficulty of maintaining your wudu, for the reason of not touching someone, right, and because of the crowdedness of it, a lot of our teachers and the Shafi'is, scholars of the world, they say to take a position from a different madhab, the Hanafi school, for example, where touching a person of the opposite gender doesn't break your wudu. Okay? So the rule of thumb is what? If you have to remake your wudu because you have to use the bathroom or something, stop wherever you are in your tawaf. Remember, this is where I stopped. Okay? Go make your wudu, come back, and you can resume from that spot. Okay? You can resume from that same spot. But if you've lost your wudu because you touched someone of the opposite gender who's not your mahram, okay, all right, like your wife or just any person who might be there with you, right? If your hands bump into them or whatever, right? In this case, okay, just follow the other madhahib that say that you don't lose your wudu and just continue your tawaf. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult. You got to just running back and forth, making wudu all the time. All right. So make sure, in order to follow this opinion, just make sure you guys make your wudu properly, right? Your complete wudu that you guys learn in this class, and then just go make your tawaf and then intend to follow the other schools when it comes to touching the opposite gender and wudu. Okay, so that's a summary on tawaf. Okay, that's a summary on tawaf, and these conditions we just talked about are for any tawaf, whether it's the tawaf that someone performs for Hajj, or for Umrah, or just anyone who wants to make tawaf for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. Okay, for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. It's generally also encouraged, right? Yeah, when someone's making tawaf, it's a form of worship, right? Some people might get excited, pushing and shoving, right? Trying to get really close to the Kaaba, okay? And this is worship, right? So having a sense of etiquette and decorum is good, is good. Being control of oneself and not bothering anyone is good as well. Okay, although they don't necessarily invalidate your tawaf if you were to not do that. Okay, so that is tawaf. Okay, that is tawaf in a nutshell. The next thing he says is a sa'i. The sa'i is, what is it? It's when you do 7 laps between Safa and Marwa, 2 hills near the Kaaba. He says the sa'i must be done 7 times, must be after the tawaf, and must begin at al-Safa and end at al-Marwa. So the famous story is that after Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, the Prophet Abraham left his wife Hajar, right? Left his wife Hajar and their son Ismail at Mecca, that she was looking for water for her son, the baby. And that she would be, for example, she would see water at Safa, at the hill of Safa, like a mirage. She'd run there. And then she'd get there, there's no water. It was a mirage. She'd look at Marwa and she'd see a mirage there for water and she'd run there. And she'd do that back and forth several times until Allah Ta'ala sent the angels or to reveal to do the kicking of the baby on the ground, crying. The well of Zamzam sprung forth and they drank from that. So this sa'i, right, is because of that. So what we do is what? You start at the hill of As-Safa, he says, right? There's 2 hills. You start at the hill of Safa and you go towards Al-Marwa, all right? And that is 1 lap. So 1 lap is from Safa to Marwa, okay? You don't have to do Safa to Marwa and back. That's 2, that's not 1. So 1 lap is just from As-Safa, tamam, is from As-Safa and until Marwa, okay? Until Marwa. Tamam. So 1 lap is from Safa and to Marwa, and the 2nd lap will be from Marwa to Safa, the 3rd one from Safa to Marwa, and so on and so forth. Does that make sense? Yeah? So imagine these are two hills. Okay, these are the two hills. This is Safa, this is Marwa. All right. You start here. Okay. You start from here. You go to Marwa. That's one. You go back to Safa. That's two. You go back to Marwa. That's three. You go back to Safa. That's four. Okay. All right. So it's not one, two. No, it's not like that. You start at Safa. You end at Marwa. That's one. You go back to Safa. That's two. So you do it 7 times. Okay. You do 7 laps like that, and you're done. After that, okay, you just shave your head and you're done. You shave your head or you cut your head and you're done. And that's the minimum hajj that you have to perform. So you make sure you do ihram, you make sure you do your arafah, you make sure you do tawaf, you make sure you do sa'i, and you make sure you shave or cut your hair. And if you're doing umrah, you do the same sequence, just without standing arafah. Okay, without standing arafah. Okay. Next class, inshallah, we'll talk about how to flesh out your hajj or umrah, your hajj more with the wajibat or the duties and the sunnahs, inshallah ta'ala. And we'll finish the section on hajj. Does anyone have any questions? Go ahead.
So tawaf is always 7 circles.
Yes, tawaf is always 7 circles. Tawaf is always 7 circles. Yeah. Any tawaf is 7 laps. Okay.
You have to be in a state of ghusl because you're allowed to be into a house.
Sorry?
So during making tawaf, is it you have to be in a state of ghusl because you're allowed to be
No, actually, when you're in ihram, you cannot be intimate with your spouse at all, right? Okay. The reason you have to have your ghusl is because it's like praying. Like when you pray, you have to be in a state where you don't need wudu and you don't need ghusl. So similarly, when you make tawaf, because it's like you're praying, you got to make sure you're in a state where you're not in need of making ghusl or making wudu. You got to have both. Okay. Go ahead. The mileage, the distance. Oh no, it's not that far. It's not miles. It's not that far. Yeah, it's not that far. Yeah, it's just it might take you a while just because there's so many people, you know. But it's not that far. Yeah, I mean, people who I've spoken to said an entire umrah. You know, if you're just moving at a healthy pace, right, you can do it like an hour or two. So that tells you it's not that far, right? And again, why a lot of times it takes that long just because it's so busy and so crowded. You might have to be a little further away from the Kaaba when you do tawaf, so it's a longer lap, you know, or just moving with the flow of people for sa'i. It might just take longer for that, but the actual distance is not that much. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, you can drink water in tawaf. Oh, that's a good question. In tawaf, that's a good question. I never thought about that. Can you drink water while you do it? Um, I'll look into it. The hadith insinuates that you can, but I'll look into it, inshallah. Did Bashir. Go ahead. They take drink and stuff. Yeah. So for sa'i between Safa and Marwa, you definitely can, because you don't have the same conditions don't apply as they do in tawaf. For tawaf, I mean the hadith seems to insinuate that you can, but I'll double check for you guys and get back to you. Okay. If I get the answer by the end of class, I'll let you know. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, there is. Um, We'll talk about it next time. Okay, bring up the question next time. It's gonna tie into what we're talking about where you have to make ihram. Okay, go ahead.
So normally, or from what I heard, that you pray 2 rak'ahs after the tawaf. Is that a
That's sunnah. It's sunnah to pray 2 rak'ahs after tawaf. Yeah, yeah. Any last questions? Go ahead. You can, right? You can. It can potentially be a deceased person. It can be a deceased person. Yeah. Yes, you can. Okay. No. If you wanted to count for them, you can't count for 2 people. Yeah. Yeah.
We incentive that for them, does that alleviate them from the obligation themselves to perform Hajj?
Assuming you're saying they haven't performed it while they're alive, right?
And this
Yeah.
could be a living person.
Yeah. So it could be a living person. Are they dead or are they alive?
Can they be a living person?
The person you make it for.
Yeah.
It could be if there's someone who cannot physically do it themselves, right? So they can have someone do it on their behalf. If they give them permission, that's fine. And if it's someone who died and they want someone and you want to do it on their behalf, you can do that too. There's just a few technicalities behind it if they've passed away. I have to look up. But if they're alive and they're unable to do it, then definitely yeah. So if the person's alive and they're unable to do it themselves, they can't physically get there, they're sick or something like that, right? Someone else can do it on their behalf. But again, one Hajj cannot count for 2 people. One Umrah cannot count for 2 people, okay? All right? And you have to make sure, right? If the person is deceased, okay? If the person is deceased, okay? You can make Umrah or Hajj on their behalf if they haven't done so, okay? If you want to use their money to do it, like someone passed away and they left behind money, like an estate, right? And you're like, I never did Hajj, let's take some of their cash, buy a ticket, have someone to do Hajj for them. You can't do that unless they actually gave you permission to do so, right? But you just want to do it for them, right? Just out of your own goodwill and you're going to pay for it. That's fine. You can do that. Okay, you can do that. Okay. All right. Okay. Any last questions? And always make sure you've done your own Hajj and Umrah first before you do someone else's. Okay. Do yours first, then do theirs. All right.
So if they are alive and are able to do it, you can't make it.
Mm-mm. If they're able to make the trip and perform the rites physically, okay, and they have the money, no one else can do it on their behalf. Okay. If they're unable to do it physically, okay, for whatever reason, they're unable to go do the rites, it's just taxing on them, they can't do it, but they have the money to perform it, right? They have to find someone to go on their behalf. They give their money to someone else who's already done it to do it on their behalf. Okay. If they don't have the money to do it, then fine. They don't have to do it anyway. It's not obligatory for them to perform Hajj or Umrah anyway. Okay. All right. Any last questions? Is that it? Also, we'll end there. And you guys have a few minutes until Ustad Muhammad comes and finishes you guys with last class, inshallah ta'ala. We close the Fatiha and Allah take us to tawfiq to get beneficial knowledge. And we act upon it and that we spread it all over the world and make the Prophet ﷺ happy with us. And that he rewards our teachers, all of our shuyukh, and those that have the rights upon us with Hadrat al-Nabi.